Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new Ace in a Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we shall be reviewing the Nakajima Ki-84 Otsu Hayate, also known as the Ki-84 Mark 1B. This is a Japanese fighter aircraft coming at a tier 4 and a battle rating of 6.0. To provide you with a brief historical overview as to this particular variant of the Ki-84, as we've already provided a general overview to the Ki-84 available using the link in the top right corner of your screen displayed now, we begin thus. With the initial Ki-84 co-variant, also known as the Ki-84 Mark 1A, rolling off the production lines in April of 1944, attempts were soon made to increase the armour to the aircraft to increase its overall effectiveness, especially in the bomber hunting role against B-29 superfortresses. Therefore, the time at which the Otsu variant design appeared can be pinpointed to just after the start of the B-29 raids on Japan, circa June 1944. The Otsu design was essentially the same as the co-variant, but with the two nose-mounted 12.7mm Ho-103 machine guns replaced by two 20mm Ho-5 cannon, complementing the two 20mm cannon mounted in the wings. Therefore, the plane had a total armament of 600 rounds, 150 rounds per cannon. The initial Ki-84 Mark 1s, including the Otsu, were all powered by the Nakajima HAF-45 Model 11 or Model 12 radial engine, providing 1,800 horsepower or 1,825 horsepower respectively. Those built in the latter half of 1944 onwards were powered by the Model 21 version, which provided 1,990 horsepower. All of these engines proved rather unreliable. In particular, a sudden loss of fuel pressure was common, and this was resolved in the final Ki-84 Mark 1 production runs in 1945. They were powered by the Model 23 engine, which was essentially the same as the Model 21, but with a low pressure fuel injection system fitted. The Ki-84 Mark 1 Otsu, or Mark 1B we should say, was produced alongside the co-variant up until the end of the war in the Pacific in August of 1945. But for reference, the Mark 1A or the co-variant was produced more than the Mark 1B or the Otsu variant, and the Mark 1C, which follows on from this plane, and we'll review that at another date, was produced in even fewer numbers. The intention to follow on from the Ki-84 Mark 1B was to replace it with the Nakajima Ki-113 fighter in early 1945. This would have been a Ki-84 Mark 1B constructed partially of steel in order to conserve the limited amounts of light alloy available, and would have featured the same armament and the HAF-45 Model 21 radial engine. This project however was scrapped in early 1945 as the plane was judged to be overweight for combat service. And with our historical overview concluded, let us take a look at how the Ki-84 Otsu handles in War Thunder's arcade mode. Today's gameplay takes place on the frontline map Great River. For this we'll be using the following setup. Stealth belts are our 20mm cannon, reason being that the stealth belts in my experience are the most powerful belts available to this aircraft. They consist of 3 high explosive fragmentation incendiary rounds which will decimate any given fight in the skies in a short period of time, and a single practice shell, which does a light amount of damage through the transfer of kinetic energy when it hits an enemy aircraft's fuselage. For our gun convergence we are using a 500m gun convergence, as we intend to engage our foes between distances of 400 to 600 metres in the midst of a turn fight or when we stall them out. Although do note that gun convergence is not too significant a factor on this aircraft due to the fact that you do have two 20mm cannon mounted in the nose, which are therefore not convergence reliant, providing you with additional reach in the head-on pass engagements as we're going to see shortly. And finally, for our fuel load, we are taking the standard 30-minute fuel load to make it to the end of the game unscathed on fuel capacity. We begin our analysis then by discussing the climb rate of this aircraft. For all intents and purposes, the climb rate of this aircraft is essentially the same climb rate as found on the predecessor subvariant, the Ki-84 Co. And many of you may be wondering at this point, is this just a Co shifted up to a battle rating of 6.0 from 4.7 and now equipped with two 20mm cannon in the nose rather than two 12.7mm machine guns? In short, the answer is yes, but hopefully we're going to show how competitive this plane is even with an increased battle rating. So coming back to the climb rate of this aircraft is still great. It is no longer the best, in fact it falls short of a number of aircraft, including but not limited to the Messerschmitt 19K4, the Focke 190D13 and the Griffon Spitfire Mark 22. But when we say fall short, this is only by say 500 metres in the race to 5,000 metres altitude, meaning this plane is still competitive in the climb and will be able to get to altitude just as quickly as the majority of its opponents, if not faster. Here we decide to go head to head against a Focke 190 Anton, and we're going to display the effectiveness of those nose mounted 20mm cannon and the stealth belts. We open fire at 1.8 km and we get ready to snap roll at 1.2 km, knocking them out completely by the time the rounds hit at a kilometer's distance. That's our first kill in the bag, and hopefully that goes to articulate the additional reach provided by the nose mounting of the cannon. Breaking along then, we go on to talk about, as well as the climb rate at this point, the overall energy characteristics of this plane, in terms of its energy retention, its ability to pick up speed in a dive, etc. What you're going to see shortly is that the dive speed characteristics of the Ki-84 Otsu are not the best. This plane accelerates very well in a dive, but its maximum dive speed is only 867 km an hour. This means that this plane is going to be outrun by a number of aircraft even at lower battle ratings in a dive, such as the P-47 M15 Thunderbolt, the Focke 190 Antons, to name a couple at lower battle ratings, and at your own battle rating, the likes of the Tempest Mark V and the Griffon Spitfire Mark 22. All of these planes having dive speeds in excess of 900 km an hour. As we dive down here on a Focke 190 D9 for reference, we're going to note the poorer energy retention of this aircraft as we miss our shots. As we snap back up at this point, essentially going into a dead vertical climb to try and zoom away, notice how we bleed a lot of our energy in doing so, and the Focke 190 D9 with their greater energy retention is able to get a lead on us. They scratch our right hand wingtip, doing a significant amount of damage. But fortunately for us, we had enough energy in store from our initial dive in order to cause them to stall out, and in doing so we now swing around to knock them out for our second kill. Quickly dispatching them and then carrying our momentum through on a P-39 N0 Aerocobra who cuts their turn to a head-on pass too late, and we knock them out for kill number 3. But note there how our energy retention almost got us killed, whereby if we'd been going up against the likes of that P-39 N0 Aerocobra in the place of that Focke 190 D9, the story would have been a very successful one for us. But against a plane which retains its energy very well when it goes through manoeuvres such as that Focke 190, the story could have been a disaster. As we now level out and come around, we go for a reload. Now the importance of this is the fact that whilst you do have 600 cannon rounds available, these rounds are exhausted rather quickly, and therefore reloads may occur a little bit sooner than you expect. Reloading whilst you've got some downtime is always going to be useful, with your reload coming in usually above 20 seconds. That's a long period of time. Here we have a Messerschmitt 19 climbing up towards us. It's a G variant, and we're going to use the same tactics as technically what we did to the Focke 190 D9, i.e. causing our opponent to stall out. But here we've got the situation under control as we go into a hammerhead on our combat flaps, snap round on the rudder, bring our nose about very gradually, fighting our rudder a bit, and we cut the G6 apart for kill number 4. We then carry our momentum through, bringing our nose up to knock out a Focke 200 Condor, the C1 sub-variant, picking up kill number 5, our ace in the day, and another double strike. Now we were talking about fighting the rudder control there. Is that a weakness of this aircraft? Well, yes, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail very shortly, but first we need to react to the Messerschmitt 19 climbing up behind us, and again we're going to try and knock them out by stalling them out in a hammerhead. And with the stall speed of this aircraft being at 120 km an hour, you can do this to a lot of your opponents with their higher stall speeds. Keep in mind however that your stall characteristics will be felt at a starting speed of 200 km an hour. You need to be wary of this, just in case you do have that foes a little bit closer than you expect, and you may find you lose a good amount of control of your aircraft as you hit the stalling characteristics of 200 km an hour and head towards your final stall speed. But on the other end, accelerating out of your stall, you'll go from 120 km an hour to 470 km an hour as quickly as any other plane. The acceleration on this aircraft in that window is very good, able to run with the likes of the Tempest Mark V and its successor the Tempest II. No plane is technically going to out-accelerate you in that region, and on top of that, if you apply war emergency power, you extend this threshold to 570 km an hour. But above this, your acceleration drops off noticeably, and you'll start to fall behind the likes of your better accelerating counterparts. Here we stall out the Focke 190 Anton, as they begin to drop their nose, trying to get a shot on us but running out of energy, and we pick up our 6th kill, making sure that the plane behind us was the Dornier 217M we evaluated, so that way they did not have the ability to get a nose-mounted cannon on us, unlike the E2 or E4 sub-variants, but instead only had the ability to get a turret on us, if that. Now talking about bombers, how does this plane fare in the Bomber Hunter role, which we articulated in the history of this plane? That's a double-edged sword. This plane can eliminate bombers very quickly due to its armament, but it can get cut apart just as easily. We come on a B-17 here, B-17E Late Edition, and eliminate them very quickly. We carry our momentum from another Focke 200 Condor, perhaps not a fair example as that's a much lower battle rating aircraft, but still, we're going to shred it. On the other end of the spectrum however, note how we're taking the paths of least resistance to bring down the bombers, i.e. the paths whereby when we attack the foe they're going to have minimal coverage with their turrets. If our foe is able to turn their 6 towards us, the likes of a G8N, and be able to bring to bear their more powerful turret armament, they'll cut us to pieces, simply because the airframe of this aircraft cannot hold up to sustained fire, even from the likes of the British 7.7mm machine guns. This plane also has a very high chance of catching fire when hit around the engine, as there are a number of fuel tanks stored right underneath the engine in the central fuselage, and this means that this plane is incredibly flammable. Therefore, avoiding taking hits from anything is a must if you're going to survive. And that's a general rule of thumb, especially at these extreme battle ratings, where a single burst from most planes will eliminate another plane, but this really matters in the Ki-84 Otsu. This plane is fragile, however you want to interpret it. Going for another reload and picking up a ton of damage on the B-17 we set on fire in multiple positions. Unfortunately, we're not going to get this kill, despite hearing a lot of binging noises in the back of our mind, indeed in the game. So let's come on to manoeuvrability at this point, as the game's intensity is now going to calm down as we come around on the Sterling. Well, the manoeuvrability of this aircraft is again a very interesting concept, because many of you would think it's Japanese, it's got to be highly manoeuvrable, one of the best. As we try to cut apart the Sterling here, set them on fire in 2 locations, but that's not going to be enough to bring down the Sterling either. And one could say we feel very cheated at this point of 2 bomber kills, which we really should have perhaps notched up. But anyway, that's the way fortune goes, and we have to accept it. The manoeuvrability of this plane is such that above a speed of 300 km an hour, especially in the speed region of 400 to 600 km an hour, this plane is exceptional for manoeuvrability. Whereby the weakest of its control surfaces, the elevator, weakest because it's quite heavy, especially at lower speeds, i.e. below 300 km an hour. The elevator holds up quite nicely and allows you to snap onto foes, and we've seen that time and time again in our boom and zoom passes, bringing our nose up very rapidly in order to try and get away, or turning the plane into a loop. The next up is the roll rate, i.e. the ailerons, whereby the roll rate of this aircraft is great. Not the best, that title will go to the likes of the Fokker 490Ds at your battle rating, but still it comes close, and allows you to re-engage targets on the fly. The most powerful control surface on this aircraft, however, is the rudder, and when we say powerful, the rudder control surface is extremely powerful for this plane, dangerously powerful as well, as we notice a Yakov Yak 9P heading off to the north in the distance, and we're going to track them for a good portion of this game, and that will highlight another weakness of this aircraft very shortly. But what do we mean by the dangerous nature of the rudder? Well, below 300 km an hour, and we're not going to demonstrate that in this game too much because we're trying to avoid it, and that's why it's taken me over a week to get this review together, because I've been trying to figure out how to counter it. The rudder will cause this plane to kick in to a spin, and it's a very dangerous spin in that, one that takes a very long time to recover from. And if you're up above 7,000 metres altitude, which will be a rarity even at higher battle ratings, and you use the rudder below 300 km an hour, it's going to take you ages to recover. This plane is not stable on its rudder when applied at full power. Using your rudder above 300 km an hour, you can make some very tight turns, especially ones which put your nose down towards the ground, because of the heavy elevator of this plane, and the nose-heavy nature, some would say, of this aircraft as a result, and the fact that this plane can roll very quickly and come around on its rudder very quickly. So that's something to keep in mind. In terms of lock-up thresholds for this aircraft then, what do we need to know? Well, both the roll rate and the elevator of this aircraft will lock up starting at 550 km an hour, with their lock-ups maximising by the time they hit 650 km an hour, taking away 50% of the control surface's response, which is not too much of a problem, but it does limit your high-speed boom and zoom capabilities if your foes are proving evasive, such as the Fokker 490 D9 that we saw towards the start of this game. Meanwhile, with the rudder, there's no lock-up at all. The rudder is so powerful that even at speeds in excess of 800 km an hour in a dive, if you hit hard on the rudder, you can actually turn this plane back up into a zoom climb just on the rudder. Although it takes some time, so be careful when you do this. One other thing to note as well in terms of taking damage in this aircraft, and I only discovered this today. This plane, when hit on the rudder, if the rudder control surface is knocked out completely, do not touch the rudder. Control the plane solely on the keyboard, do not use your mouse. The chance of you going into a flat spin on a broken rudder is insanely high. But speaking of insanely high chances, there's a very good chance that B-25 Mitchell could have got a hit on us using their front guns, either ones controlled by the pilot or alternatively their nose turret, but we managed to predict it just right and cut the head on just right that we set them on fire while their wings. Unfortunately again, that's not going to be enough to get a kill, they're going to go home and land safely. But the B-25 was being a little bit sneaky and we made them pay for it. As we carry our momentum through then, what else do we need to know? What about the turn circle of this aircraft? Well, this plane isn't really a turn fighter per se. It can outturn the likes of the Fokker 490s, the Tempests, and even outturn on occasion the Griffon Spitfires, depending on the situation whether the Griffon Spitfires have got a lot of energy or not. If they're in a low energy state, i.e. below 350 km an hour, you have the advantage. But the turn circle of this plane is just slightly beyond that of a Yak 9P, very slightly, which means you can outturn some of the more energy driven fighters at your battle rating, but the purest turn fighters, or those that sit in that middle ground, such as the Yak 9 and the turn fighters being the likes of the M1K2JA, they will overcome you in a turn fight very quickly. And because you have to be wary of the fact that your rudder is actually a very dangerous control surface at low speeds, the likes of the Messerschmitt 109Gs and Ks will be able to outmaneuver you in a turn fight as well. Although with your great roll rate, you can always force people to overshoot by the means of a barrel roll, something which this plane enjoys very much so. So if you are going to go into an engagement, you need to keep your speed above 300 km an hour, and ideally keep it in that 400 to 600 km an hour region, and really you only have time to make one or two manoeuvres before you need to break away, as your speed will drop away quite rapidly. We go head to head with the Yak 9P, unfortunately only scoring a hit, not a kill, but it seems as though we've actually burst their water tank, or perhaps we've opened up one of their fuel tanks. And as we try to pursue here, note how the Yak 9P gradually starts to get away, and unfortunately we're struggling to trace them with our rounds, the Ho-5 cannon requiring a lot of lead to be provided as the Yak 9P gets away from us. And we discussed earlier in this video, I believe we have, that the Ho-5 cannon of this plane can be perceived as unreliable, but very effective when they do hit. The issue is that due to the muzzle velocity, you have to provide a little bit more lead than demonstrated on the lead indicator, and we saw that in that dive on the Fokker 490 D9 at the start, and we just saw it there with the Yak 9P shot, whereby if you aim just a little bit in front of the lead indicator, which we typically do in the majority of our reviews that you've seen on this channel hopefully, that will score us some hits, but with the Ho-5 cannon you have to provide even more lead typically to get a clean kill, unless of course it's a head-on pass. But the Ho-5 cannon do the job very well when they do hit. That means you've got that double-edged sword in terms of damage output. So beyond that then, we covered most of the bases in general in terms of characteristics and whatnot of the Ki-84 Otsu. What else is there to know? Well, in general, the feeling can be one of frustration as depicted here, and this is what we're coming on to about demonstrating one of the weaknesses of the Ki-84 Otsu when chasing foes, with the Yak 9P here in this instance. The problem is that once this plane hits its great overall acceleration threshold, i.e. 470 km an hour on just pure acceleration from its engine, or 570 with all emergency power, a lot of planes will just gradually outrun it into the distance, the most pronounced example being the likes of a Tempest 2. And this means that foes who do get up to roughly the same altitude as you, if not say 1000 metres below you, can frustrate you, because whenever you go to chase them, either just by following them in a straight line, or alternatively diving after them, they don't really need to do much to get away from you, i.e. cause the distance indicators to go from dropping to increasing quite quickly. And this means a lot of the time you need to catch your foes before they're able to build up their energy states in the Ki-84 Otsu, compared to what may be required in the likes of a late Griffon Spitfire. Here we decide to dive down on a number of foes. We decide not to go for the Messerschmitt 19K4 as they're quite close to their spawn. We may get caught out in doing so, especially with our plane already being in a crippled state, and we decide to look towards an LA9. Unfortunately, that's not going to prove providential, simply because the LA9 is keeping a lot of speed. They went into a dive, got themselves down to ground level, and we're seeing this here. We're not able to catch up with them very quickly. So you really need to catch your foes by surprising this aircraft in order to do the damage. We can see here a train of enemy fighters. We're trying to pick out one. The Yak 9P comes around to try and get a head on. We dodge that. We tried to snap up at the LA9, but unfortunately due to the 50% drop in our elevator control surface with the lockup, we can't quite follow, so we have to break out. And with the game just about to end, with the mission complete by our team, we decide to come around and frustrate an enemy Fokker 490 A1. The Fokker 490 in the middle of that little squabble there, attacking our friendly Yak 9, who gets eliminated by the LA9. As the Fokker 490 goes head to head, we try to get them in the head-on pass, but then we decide to snap roll out of the way. Instead we decide not to use a snap roll but go dead vertical, going into essentially a spiral, taking a couple grazing hits from their machine guns but nothing from their 20mm cannon. As we just hang over the top of them using our great overall stall speed compared to their own, their energy bleeds out but we can't get the kill. The Typhoon does after the game ends, and it's time for us to take a look at the post-game stats. Well, 9 kills and 2 assists, we're able to pick up 45,530 silver lions and 4,338 research points. To defeat the Ki-84 Otsu in a given matchup then, I can recommend one or two approaches. The first, if you're flying a plane orientated towards boom and zoom playstyles, such as the Tempest Mark V and the Fokker 490D12, is to allow the Ki-84 to pursue you in a high-speed dive, whereby they will hit their maximum dive speed very quickly and will not be able to keep up with you as you pull away. As the Ki-84 pilot becomes frustrated and zoom climbs away, follow closely, as by the time they begin to hit their stall speed, due to their lack of energy conservation when going into their zoom climb, you should just have enough energy to bring them down before you hit your own stall, due to your greater energy conservation by comparison. The alternative approach, if you are flying a more jack-of-all-trades plane, such as the F-8F-1B Bearcat, or alternatively a turn fighter, such as the M1K2JA, is to lure the Ki-84 Otsu into a turn fight, whereby the speed of the turn fight drops below 300 km an hour very early on, as at this point the Otsu pilot will lose their key control surface in the form of their hypersensitive rudder, and if they use it below 300 km an hour, they have a very high chance of going into a flat spin. If they do not use it, they will be relying on two weaker control surfaces, i.e. their ailerons and their elevator, and this will not be enough to allow them to come around on you. Instead, you'll gradually gain the upper hand and be able to bring them down. In avoiding these two particular situations today in our own Ki-84 Otsu, we're able to enjoy the plane and hopefully demonstrate that despite it technically being the Ki-84 Co with an increased battle rating and increased armament, the plane can perform very well at its battle rating and tier. One has to keep in mind, however, this is an aircraft which requires its pilot not only to know about the energy states of its foes and be able to assess them on the fly, but also being able to keep an awareness of the energy state of the aircraft itself, as if not managed correctly, this plane can fall out the sky very quickly. In the case of this aircraft, ladies and gentlemen, it really is be the broken or the breaker. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.